see that post-lunch energy levels have not sunk. They've actually risen, if the noise is anything to go by. Welcome back. I hope you had some great opportunities to learn more, resolve some minor disagreements, whatever it was you spent your lunchtime doing. We're all set for a busy set of discussions, and before introducing the next panel, might I, on behalf of everybody, welcome the delegation that SDI have brought along to us this afternoon. International investors, United States, Switzerland and other parts too who are joining us. So can we all be on our best behaviour, please? None of that Scottish stuff from this morning. One area where we're going to improve, we're all kind of people who are driven by metrics and like to do what we're supposed to do. We're not taking the British Business Bank's lead on how long a session might last for this afternoon, eh, Barry? We're going to stick to time. And Susan is, at this very moment, devising the punishments for those who don't and the incentives for those who do. And I'm going to keep it as vague as that, so that it's either a couple of caramel wafers or whatever else. Serious point is this. We're a lot to get through, and we're keen, if we may, just to keep on track. Or, no, I'll resist the cliches. Because next, we're going to space. We've taken out one session. If you're looking at the agenda, we'll catch up with that, I'm sure, at another time. But in terms of space, as I said right at the start of the day, really exciting place. Would have been laughed at as an idea a few years ago. Now the credibility is real, and the opportunities are very exciting indeed. We're going to have a short introduction to the subject from Hina Kahn, who's the CEO of Space Scotland. So I put her on standby now. And could the panel, to be chaired by Mark Boggett of Seraphim VC, please come to the stage now. And once Hina's session is completed, we'll go straight in to the discussion. And all of that will be finished by 2:45, won't it?
So thank you very much for that introduction, and everybody here gets to sit here and be stared at whilst I talk for a few minutes, but hopefully not too difficult. So thank you very much. Some of you I met yesterday, the US delegation investors that are here with STI, so lovely to see you all again, and I promise I won't run away this time. I'm definitely staying here for the evening. So my name is Dr. Hina Kahn, and I'm the Executive Director of Space Scotland, and as was mentioned, some years ago it may have been kind of laughed at even, that, Scotland space sector, that doesn't make sense. But actually it's been a thriving community both within the academic world for many decades, but also now, as we'll see from our panel and the discussion that will happen later, a very, very fruitful industry segment, both in the commercial side, ripe for investment and growth, for the potential to be a leading global space nation from where we were not that long ago. My role here in Space Scotland is really to support and to create an environment that is fruitful and beneficial for our businesses and investors to come and be part of this ecosystem. And as you'll hear from the panel, the sector is not just one element of what you may think of space constitutes. Some people have ideas of space is about rockets, space is about launching things into our space and near-Earth environment. Some people think about space as its satellites, both large and small, and others think about it in terms of, well, it's about the data that comes down and how you apply that and make actionable decision-making tools and services that make the world a better place. And to be fair, you would all be right, and thankfully we have the benefit of the community and the ecosystem here in Scotland, where all of those different mechanisms and businesses are here and are thriving. And so we have a very diverse community in terms of the businesses that are in Scotland within the space sector, and also the way that it connects into the academic and policy government, both here in Scotland and across the UK. And so my role is to provide that the kind of glue that sticks that together, but also to present it as a viable opportunity for investment and growth on a global scale. And I'm sure that you'll hear from the panel on all of the different elements and the various stages that the companies are in that will help drive that growth potential and economic value for the UK. Scotland is part of a much wider ecosystem across the UK landscape, and so there's a lot going on here, both in Scotland, but also how that connects across the UK and across Europe as a whole. And really within that environment, you can see that there's a lot of opportunity within the sector from the small and medium enterprises, but also the connection into the academic and the leading research, the innovation that's happening between our universities here in the Central Belt from the West Coast to the East Coast, but also across the Highlands and Islands and down to the borders regions, where there's a much more rural community, but actually applications are also important when you try and think about how does our rural community apply the applications that we have in space to make their world better and to secure a workforce that can encourage our young people to go and live and prosper in these areas as well. So I won't take up too much more time, but just to say that I hope the panel is exciting. I know it will be from the panelists that we have. But really, just think about where are there opportunities that you can see, what part of the sector is of interest to you, and how can you see a growth, how do you see what you're looking to achieve applying into the sector here in Scotland, and make those connections as we go into the afternoon and networking later this evening. Thank you very much.
So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mark Boggett. I'm the CEO, one of the co-founders of Seraphim Space. We are the world's leading and most prolific investor in the space market. We launched the first space-focused venture fund in 2016. We then launched what is now the largest space accelerator globally, which operates in the UK, in the US, and in Singapore for Asia. And in 2021, we listed the world's first publicly listed space growth fund, which is listed on the London stock market, called the Seraphim Space Investment Trust. So across all of those different activities, we've got more than 100 portfolio companies. About 25% of our portfolio is in the UK. So as we've heard, the UK really punches above its weight in the global market. 56 billion has been invested into this market since 2015, and the UK accounted for 17% of that. So a very significant investment into the market. Indeed, my first investment of the world's first space-focused venture fund was into Spire Global. And that financing directly went into building out their operations here in Scotland and driving the ecosystem here. So I'm really excited to hopefully introduce a room full of investors to a really exciting growth market. Whilst we've lived through a macroeconomic setback for the last few years, no one's really told investors into the space industry. So the number of volume of deals continues to grow every quarter, whereas we've seen general venture decline over the last 18 months. We've seen continued growth, record quarter after quarter of investment into space. So the volume of deals continues to increase. The value of those deals has set back over a period of time, but in 2023 we've seen a real rebound. So in the last quarter alone, up to the 30th of September, we've seen a 56% increase in investment. And most of that is actually being driven by later stage investors in the C round, the D round, the E round. They've really been absent from the market for a few quarters. This last quarter really saw a return to multi-hundred million size investment rounds that were really a feature of the market previously. So we think that the appetite's coming back. It's being driven by growth investors. And why is that? Well, the defense market and climate and sustainability are two of the biggest markets that are focused on and addressed by the space market. I'm sure we're going to draw out some of those as customers in our discussion. So we've got a fantastic panel here today, very representative of different parts of the Scottish space ecosystem. So I'm just going to go around the panel here and just ask each of them to briefly introduce themselves. But one of the things I really want them to draw out is about the size and scale of their business right now, and an understanding of how you got here in terms of the capital that's been invested, and perhaps if there are some good Scottish investors and good government Scottish investors there, if you could let us know, is that part of your journey as well? So let's start over here with Andrew.
Good afternoon, everyone. First, thank you for being here. Hopefully we can get in 45 minutes, all of you interested in space. That's our task, another day in the office. Thank you, Hina, for the words. Basically, I'm here on behalf of Orbex, head of strategy for the company. What we do is space transportation for small satellites. So we do that with two products. One is dedicated space launch through our launch vehicle. So 150 kilos to low Earth orbit vehicle. And we do that along with our own spaceport in the north of Scotland, in Sutherland. The value proposition there is very easy. It's an easier service to use than the current one. It's more responsive and it's customizable. When I explain it to my grandmother, I tell her I work for a taxi company. You have a satellite you need to put in space, you call me. The other service that we offer is a ride share. So it's basically, if I'm a taxi, the other one's a bus. So we offer that through our partnership with a company called Arianespace as the space launch monopoly in Europe. And basically the value proposition there is price. So that's what we do. In terms of size, to answer your question, Mark, we're 150 people now. Around 80% of that are based here in Scotland, north of Scotland, in a place called Forres. It's half an hour drive from Inverness, if you know. Then 20% of the people in Denmark, in Copenhagen. We've been lucky enough to raise around 80 million pounds, $100 million for colleagues from the US. Around 80% of that private capital. Very, very lucky we have investors here in the room. SNEB helped us in our last round. They've been very supportive, as well as BGF was here earlier, Octopus Ventures. So a group of investors, private, kind of traditional financial investors, also strategic investors with US companies as well, so Jacobs Engineering, Damo Space. So if you see a bit of everything that we've managed to attract, as well as support from UK Space Agency, European Space Agency. So in summary, anyone and everyone that I can go and ask for money, we've been there.
Good. Well, it sounds like you're very good at it. Okay, well, let's move on. Let's move on to you next, Andrew.
Yes, good afternoon. I'm Andrew Christie from Sofant Technologies. I'm the VP of Engineering at Sofant Technologies. Sofant are developing Ka-band satellite terminals supporting multi-orbit, multi-beam mobile connectivity markets. Where most of our staff are based here in Scotland, in Edinburgh. We have 29 employees. We have so far taken about £12 million of investment from mostly angel investors, private funds, and also we have had a number of grants. We are currently working on a contract with the European Space Agency that was part funded by UK Space, and historically we've had some Innovate UK funding. So what I'd like to talk about just a little bit is explain what Sofant are doing and how that might be a little bit different from our competitors in the terminal market. So our core technology is an RF MEMS technology that was originally researched at Edinburgh University. Our approach has been different to many of our competitors. The management team at Sofant come out of the smartphone, semiconductor and high volume backgrounds. So we're really not space insiders. And we've decided we need to address the market slightly differently from our competitors. We've put a lot of effort and emphasis on being able to scale the business, easily scale the business, and as a result, drive down cost. So we've focused very heavily on manufacturing and how we should manufacture the product. So that's been an integral part of our development process. So in the design process, we've considered that right from the beginning. So unlike many of our competitors who might design something, build a prototype, and then figure out how to manufacture it. We've focused on this from right at the start. And this is different. We believe this is different from most existing terminal providers in the market. We have a highly automated, highly scalable process using methods and processes from the smartphone industry.
Great. Well, thank you very much for your introduction there. Great. Okay, can we move on to you, Derek, next of all? Just give us a sort of profile of the business. Just help the audience understand, where the business is today and the scale of the business.
Hi, my name's Derek Harris. I'm the Business Operations Manager for Skyrora and also the CEO of EcoScene, one of our spin-off companies. Skyrora is a small launch vehicle company, kind of similar to Orbex, but we have the ability to take 315 kilos into the sun-synchronous and polar orbits. What really sets us apart with this is we're only roughly about coming up to 6 years old. We were started in 2018. We've been privately funded up to 40 million by our CEO and chief investor, Vladimir Levikin. What that's allowed us to do over the last few years is to build the largest UK rocket engine test site, which is actually only about 7 miles south of Edinburgh. We've had up to 6 or 7 suborbital flights, including our largest one from the Skyrora L, which took off from Iceland last year. And most recently, you may have heard about us with a recent deal that we've done with Viasat and CGI about practicing and looking at in-range, so using satellites to do in-air tracking of vehicles, rockets, space debris, things like this. It's been a very quick journey over the last 6 years, but it has allowed us with that funding, as I said, to bring forward EcoScene, which is reclaiming plastic and turning it into rocket fuels, but also to push forward where we got another grant actually from Innovate UK for $500,000 to use our 3D printer, which is one of the largest in the world. It allows us to print and machine at the same time, but we're now pioneering using dual metallic alloys, so basically printing copper onto Inconel, things like this, to help try and make things much easier, lighter, cheaper and better.
Great, thank you. Right, well, let's move on. So a nice succinct view of your business and give us an understanding of where you are today.
Thanks, Mark. Alan Cannon, CEO and co-founder of Crucial, formerly known as R3IoT. Previous to that, worked at Clyde Space, where I was head of missions. So I've had the privilege of working in both the upstream segment of the space industry as well as now the downstream segment. Crucial, what do? We help industries who are struggling to digitize. We help them digitally transform their business by making it very easy to move asset data from IoT sensors back to the cloud, where organizations can increase their performance, increase their sustainability, and maximize returns on investment. The business was started in 2018. We bootstrapped for 3 years, and then we closed a seed round, a $4.3 million seed round led by USVC Space Capital based in New York. That came off the back of graduating from the Creative Destruction Lab accelerator, very space focused. We were one of 20 space tech companies that went through that program. We were able to attract investment off the back of that, as well as for North American mentors. So we've had the benefit of having a kind of North American advisor network as we've grown the business. We've scaled the business to 25 people. We recently closed another investment, taking our overall investment to $7.5 million, and we are targeting a Series A in 2024. Great to have some of our investors here in the room today. We're backed by Scottish National Investment Bank, University of Strathclyde, and Scottish Enterprise, and we recently brought on board a new investor based in Dubai, Azurex. So privileged to be here. Thanks very much.
Great. Well, thank you. And last but not least, Mark.
Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Mick O'Connor. I'm the co-founder of a company called Fire Arrow. We're a new start company. We regard ourselves as launch concierge to the world. We design and we build spaceports. working for either commercial organisations or for governments, and we take that process from ideation through space, to the orbital insertion stage. We're focused primarily on the Middle East and Asia Pacific. We've now have a partner in the Middle East. We've got some interesting conversations with a nation there. But we've also had an inquiry from Ecuador, which wasn't on the plan, wasn't on the map, but it's an opportunity. So we'll look at anything outside our core market on a case-by-case basis. I've been involved in launching stuff into the sky since about 2005. I'm often asked, Mick, can we really launch something into space from Scotland? And the answer is, of course we can. And the reason we can, and the reason I'm so confident, is because we've already done it. And in 2017, from the Outer Hebrides, we launched an object into space 320 kilometres from Scotland. The highest object launched into space from UK soil. We've done it already, and we need to then build upon that.
Great, thank you. Right, now we know everybody. Now let's get down to the discussion. So we'll start off with explaining our thesis around space, why we think this is an interesting market to invest into. So we consider that low-cost launch, low-cost miniaturized satellites built together are operating the ability to build much larger constellations in space. And taken together, these larger constellations are effectively creating a digital infrastructure around our planet. And each of the satellites are able to look down at planet Earth and gather information in higher resolution, real time, low cost. And that enables us to be able to have a new data set about our planet in close to real time. We consider this to be similar to a new internet, a new road network, a new railway network. And all of these satellites are gathering information about the planet. They're able to apply AI to that data set to be able to make sense of the data, identify anomalies, identify how to use resources more efficiently, and to identify bad actors and hold them to account, those that are dumping effluent into rivers or doing illegal fishing and those sorts of activities. So this is the reason why my organization is focused around space. So I'm really interested to speak to the launch members of the panel today. When anyone thinks about launch, you think about Elon Musk and SpaceX. That's quite a company to be up against. And launch is also one of the markets that's actually already had significant sums of money invested. So can you just sort of help me understand how you're differentiated and how you're going to scale your business to become, to provide a venture return, given the sort of competitive position in the market and the funding elsewhere?
Sure, can take a step. So basically, first I think it makes sense to explain a bit the current options, which is SpaceX, basically. Imagine you're here in Scotland, you build your satellite, which is kind of your precious thing, put a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of money into it, and now you want to launch it. The best option you have is SpaceX. You have to go halfway across the world. There's a lot of regulation, export control, permissions. You have to send a team of 5 to 10 people 3 months in advance, 3 months later, so that adds to a bunch of cost, right? Basically, the alternative that we're trying to offer is you can launch from here. Not only because the vehicle is here, because the spaceport is here. So you can have your satellite and then 3 hours from an international airport be at the spaceport, and that gives you a lot of freedom in terms of the things you can do, the things you can launch, the frequency that you can launch to. Basically, that's taking launch to European small satellite companies. So that's kind of the context where we're moving in. In terms of how do we manage to make a venture return, basically, how many companies do you launch? There aren't many companies you can launch with. The SpaceX, let's say, in the US, there might be 3 or 4 more. In Europe, right now, there is none. And you might be able to get 2 or 3. So if you see there's limited supply for a lot of demand. So that's how you get the market. The second bit is launch is merely just the start of this, right? So you point to that market as the data, right? So when you're launching and you basically own the bottleneck of the supply chain, and then you can start doing heaps of stuff, right? You can start getting into satellites, you can start getting into data, you can start getting into in-space transportation. That unlocks a lot of the industry, right? So there's a lot of value that we create just by putting assets in space, and by holding that kind of bottleneck, there's a lot of value that we can capture. Now that if you spend 10 minutes Googling space launch, you'll probably find a list of 100+ companies that are doing space launch. And Mark, you can please correct me if I'm wrong. If you start looking into them, you'll find that there's 80% of those are very kind of meaningful efforts, but to build one of these companies, it takes a lot of money, a lot of effort, and there's a lot of risk to it. So don't be kind of put off by your first Googling. Look into it more, and you'll figure out that it is a very kind of supply short market, and that's where, at least from our perspective, the returns come. Again, limited supply, and second, you're in that, you own the bottleneck of the supply chain. So there's a lot that from that position you can do.
Yep. Well, I can certainly echo all of that from my portfolio of 100 companies. The supply is still very limited, you know, so there is a lot of considerations going into who you're going to use for launch. Derek, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, certainly. One of the big things that comes up a lot, and especially with SpaceX being mentioned, is the cost per launch. So SpaceX are masters at getting the cost down to about £1,000, £500 per kilo. But the thing is, we just need to look at what's happening with the launch market as well. It's kind of similar to what happens with the car market, certain vehicles being retired. You've seen Rocket Lab begin to retire their vehicle to concentrate on a new one for doing bigger and heavier payloads. We know Elon Musk, his eyes aren't really set on putting these small satellites into space. He wants to go to Mars. Mm-hmm. So for that purpose, is he really going to want to drop off 150 kilos worth of CubeSats on the way to Mars once he's got that up and running? No, he's not. That service is going to die off at that point. So that's one thing we keep looking forward to for that point of view. But the other is the innovation and the outbranching, and that's how we expect that we will have that upscale within the profits coming from ourselves. You look at the in-orbit servicing market. At the moment, there's thousands of satellites up there. Some can be reused, some can't. So being able to have something like our third stage, which is a space tug, which allows us to do basically an MOT on a satellite to check if the solar panels are still working, or remove it to a graveyard orbit. These are big businesses coming up. You're seeing companies like ClearSpace and Astroscale now looking at the problem of space debris for net zero in space as well as net zero on Earth. Yep. So these are all opening up opportunities, and with the innovations that we have and what we're seeing within the Scottish sector, that this is what is going to push that scale up in profits. So you're not just about launch, you're about in-space activities afterwards. So just for the audience, just to put this into perspective, there's been, since Sputnik, only 16,000 satellites that have ever been launched. And nearly half of those, 42%, were since 2020. So in my portfolio alone, there are, the portfolio companies are looking to put up 200,000 satellites during the course of the next 10 years. So the amount of satellites that are going to be launched, and as you quite rightly say, while SpaceX are the sort of volume play at the moment, they've got their eye on another market. So there's significant market opportunity. So let's bring this back to Scotland. So space is really punching above its weight in Scotland, and in particularly in the launch category. We've heard from the launch providers, but why is it that Scotland's got 3 spaceports? That's more than most of Europe, isn't it? What's the story behind that, and how can these spaceports become profitable and provide returns to investors?
Yes, it's actually 5 spaceports we've got being built at the moment.
Right.
We've got 3 vertical launch spaceports, so the classic rocket goes up, and then we've got 2 horizontal launch spaceports. I anticipate that 2 of the vertical launch they will be successful as orbital spaceports. I think some other spaceports will be suborbital, and what we're doing at Prestwick is a horizontal launch solution. One of the main differences, and I think the benefit of having both vertical and horizontal launch is that from a horizontal perspective, we can go anywhere in the world. We're not fixed to a particular geography. But I think if we go back a number of years and think in terms of the growth of space and space flight, so back in 2016, I had the privilege of leading the development of the industrial strategy for aerospace, defence and marine for the Scottish Government. And at that point in time, space was a bit of a glint in our eye in terms of what space can really do something in space. And one of the kind of key companies involved at that point in time was Clyde Space, doing some really good things. And when we were developing the strategy, space sat underneath aerospace. Now, technically, that's correct, but we thought we're going to bring this out from underneath aerospace and actually, give it a bit of light and see if it can grow. And I think where it is now, relative to where it was, 8 years ago, we could have never anticipated it, not at all. So in terms of where will we be in another 8 years? Well, I can't even imagine, can't even predict. But I think in terms of what we have created is, in terms of small sat manufacture, we make more small sats than anywhere in Europe. We're only second to California. We are the data capital of Europe. And when we've got the spaceports, we'll be the launch capital of Europe. How that makes us unique is almost that end-to-end ecosystem from upstream to downstream, which is great. And I think what Scotland needs to do is now build upon that. But that's not where the story begins, and it's not where it ends. It's where do we go beyond that? So I think starting to look at what we can do in space, either in terms of systems, subsystems, components. I don't ever see a point where we're going to plant a saltire on the moon. I don't think that's what we're about. But I think in terms of what type of things could we do in space, I think going back to Derek's point about Elon Musk and his aspirations. So we're looking at the lunar gateway, we're looking at connectivity in the moon, we're looking at space habitats, we're looking at space law, we're looking at space physiology. There's a whole market that opens up beyond just engineering. So to me, what we're doing in Scotland, we should be really proud of, but it's only a starting point.
So let's bring the conversation to data.
If I can add, I don't think a lot of people know this. Orbex did not start in Scotland. Our company actually started in Denmark because four of our 5 founders are there, and we chose to develop 80% of, and we have 80% of our people here because it is such a great place for the industry. One of that, you mentioned that, is the satellites. So basically I need to be next to my customer. The second one is the spaceports. So it just makes sense for me to build my rocket here. So just kind of interesting point.
Thank you. So we're going to talk about data next of all. So our thesis was that this is all about the data, and that's really where the value is going to be ultimately created across many different industries. One of the observations that we've made of the market is that there's been a lot of investment into launch, a lot of investment into the constellations, but a very limited amount of investment into what we call downlink, actually moving the data between satellites, moving the data back down to the ground in a cyber-secure manner. In fact, if you look at all of the different sectors of the space industry, that is the least invested sector. So tell us why that is, and why the market have got it wrong. What are the opportunities that the market hasn't yet caught up with, and why they should be focused around data right now?
Absolutely. I think from a let's answer that first question first. Why is it the case? Because I think there was a lot of foundational infrastructure that had to be put in place first. So we had to build the rockets to be able to get the satellites into orbit. We then had to build the satellites to get the data up there initially and build out those constellations so that we can essentially cover the whole Earth, imaging the Earth, being able to communicate from any point on Earth. And yeah, data was a little bit of a kind of, it'll come once we've got that foundational infrastructure in place. So that foundational infrastructure is now in place. We can send and communicate from any part of the world using many of the different communication constellations that are on orbit now. SpaceX, Starlink constellation being the market leader, but there are many others. We can image the Earth almost, down to the square kilometre extremely regularly now. So we have the ability to do that in wide variety of different spectrums and, gather a lot of insights there. So really, I think the main focus now is in that distribution layer. How do we use the communication, the Earth observation data to really inform decision makers globally, be that corporate decision makers, be that governments, be that NGOs? How do we give them the data enabled by space and allow them to make better decisions here on Earth? And that may be better decisions around performance of their business or around helping inform them about allowing them to tackle some of the biggest challenges that we have on Earth at the moment, the biggest one being climate change. So how do we make better climate interventions? And we're actually involved in a number of projects at the moment that are focused on gathering data from places where you can't gather data or you couldn't gather data up to very recently, and allowing that data to be utilised in a way that is informing governments and NGOs to make better decisions around how we intervene. A specific project that we're involved with the UN on water, better water resource with the European Space Agency. So I think, yes, it's a timing thing. I think that's where the money needs to go to now, and hopefully some of that comes to us.
So that's the opportunity now. So Andrew, what's Sofant's angle on that?
Yeah, I guess we're a little bit different. We're trying to enable or provide a terminal solution that enables people who are mobile to get high throughput data. Many of the constellations, particularly in Ka band, are geosatellites, and the biggest market for geo today is aircraft, followed by probably maritime, and then we think land mobile will be the next one. So they're all mobile connectivity requirements, and they all require high data throughput. So our focus has been on making a terminal solution that is low power, low size, and low cost. And we've addressed this solution, and we're currently working on a terminal for Inmarsat VSAT. And what's unusual about us is we can provide a 10 times saving in size, weight, and power over the traditional approaches other people are taking to terminals. So what we're trying to do is to enable that kind of high data throughput, reliable communications at a low cost, to enable all that infrastructure that's already in space to be utilized.
Great. So what we've really been talking about here is Space 2.0. This is about this digital infrastructure, the creation of the digital infrastructure, the data that comes from that. Space 3.0 is about building infrastructure in space. And we're now just entering into an era where that's becoming affordable because the cost of accessing space is low enough for us to start putting things like data centers into space, things like cell towers in space. Half the world's on 0G. The other half of the world is on 5G. There needs to be a way of addressing that, and space is going to be one of those solutions. And then things like manufacturing in space, lifting dirty, polluting industries from planet Earth and taking them into space. And new manufacturing areas like biopharma in space are particularly some of the areas that we're looking at now. So we've got a few minutes left of this session today. Rather than taking questions from the audience, I just wanted to go through each of the panel for you just to succinctly sort of talk about your sort of view of where this market is going and why, in sort of relation to your organization, should investors really be interested? Why now? Why is it the appropriate time to do it now rather than in a year's time or 2 years' time or last year or the year before?
I'll jump in first if that's okay.
Please do, yeah.
That's fine. So I think timing is perfect, actually. We've specifically developed a technology based on all this new technology that's on orbit. So you've got Starlink, you've got Kuiper, which is coming on, which is Amazon's new constellation, and various others. So timing is fantastic because you've got the ability to put these satellites on orbit to give us the ability to communicate from any point on Earth. Particularly, we're focused on industrial markets, and then there's a need within these heavy industries to understand what's going on to allow them to make these better interventions from a sustainability point of view. So now is the time. There's the drive from the industries to digitise. There's a barrier to digitisation at the moment. That's changed. So we are in a very good position to scale. We're seeing a lot of traction in a lot of the industries, such as transport, infrastructure, who are all trying to digitise and leverage the benefits that come with digitisation. We're expanding into the US, we're expanding into Australia. So I think from my perspective, it's a great time to get on board, and it's only going to get better.
Yeah. So something you didn't mention then was defence, and that's one of the largest markets that we see that are queued up with big budgets and the desire to invest them as quickly as they can do to this data set. Mick, what is the sort of closing thing that we should know about why now for 5-Arrow? Why should the investors in the room think 5-Arrow right now?
Yeah, well, I think the point you raise about defence, I think is quite pertinent. I think that having, let's say, space flight capability, having a spaceport, I think will become part of critical national infrastructure at some point in time. I think sovereign nations will need the ability to get assets and spacecraft into space. We, from a military perspective, we are relying more and more on satellite communications. There are some bad actors out there who've demonstrated their capability to knock your satellites out. So I know some conversations we've been having recently that military, both UK and elsewhere, are really keen to look at affordable is one part of it, but responsive access to space. So if a satellite is knocked out by a bad actor, how do they get another satellite back on point as quickly as possible? And not so long ago that would almost been unthinkable, but it's now becoming a real clear and present danger.
Okay, should we go to the end of the panel over there? So what's your thought?
Sure. I think just basically boil it down to 3 points. One is that this is just starting. This is like being in the internet industry in the early 90s. And the things that we can do now with technologies that you guys are investing in, so AI, 3D printing, applied to space, this is going to be incredible. The second point is a shift to commercial. So the past 50 years have been driven by government and government agenda of what things of what space, where space goes is basically where the government wants it to go. Now we have commercial enterprises driving the industry. That means that innovation is just a matter of time, right? That when you have a lot more people with a lot more commercial interests digging their heels into this, there's going to be a big change everywhere. And the third one, I think, is just to echo your guys' point, is defense. Space hasn't traditionally been very active in the defense space, pun intended. But now that with the past year, unfortunately, in the developments, we've seen that the space is actually offers a lot of opportunities and a lot of intelligence that is just there for the taking. So I think I'll leave you with those 3 points. If you want to be in the early 90s in the internet, get into space now.
Great. Derek, do you want to briefly give us your
point? I want to go back to what Mick was saying in the responsive access. It's a perfect example. How many people came here today using SatNav? How many people used their bank cards to buy petrol or whatever? These are all done by satellites. These are knocked out. We're basically crippled. We've become a society that would be crippled without it. So that responsive access is huge, and that was why we developed that going along as part of with Skyrora XL. You saw that with the L last year, and when we were in Iceland, it literally took us a week to set up and have the launch. That's what the government's looking for, and that's what defence is looking for. They can't have everyone running around like a bit of a headless chicken for weeks trying to get their ATM cards to work, unfortunately. But I think why now is the time to invest, whether it be in Skyrora or the Scottish space sector, is it's very different from what you see in the rest of the world. I know a lot of the guys here on the panel, Hina, who was up earlier with Space Scotland, there's a lot of succinct pathways. So whether it's the sustainable roadmap for space, whether it's the Scottish Space Strategy, we're all pulling in the same direction. And what you get in Scotland, you get excellent engineers and excellent innovation. But you may have a product, so what making a rocket is, are we going to reinvent the wheel? No, but we're going to find a way to do it 2 hours quicker so we can go to the pub. It's going to be cheaper, it's going to be quicker, so it will be better.
Right, well, thank you for that. Now, I'm going to draw this to a close, but I'm just going to make a sort of final point. So, sorry, Andrew, I didn't give you the chance to say your final point there. But really, what we've talked about here is this sort of development of this data set from space. This is the opportunity. The opportunity really is now. You can read many bankers' reports that shows this to be a $1 trillion market opportunity. And this data set is going to help us from a defence perspective, keep the world a safer place and hold bad actors to account. But it's also going to do some incredible things from the climate perspective. It's going to help us monitor things better. It's going to help us use resources more efficiently. And if we take a small step into the future, there are opportunities that are underway right now around things such as developing solar farms in space to deliver clean energy to planet Earth. So I just want to take the opportunity to give everyone on the panel a round of applause, and hopefully you found that interesting today. So thank you.
Thanks to Mark and the panel. Clearly the prospect of those caramel wafers acted as the appropriate incentive. We are on time and we've had some great insights along the way. I mean, what a great area to invest in, what a great Scottish opportunity that already we see is being taken up. You've already earned your coffee break and we'll be back here sharp at 15:15 for the next stage of this afternoon's proceedings.